Under the heavy gray sky, a girl walked barefoot along the dirt path, clutching her torn sweater around her small frame. She was only 14, but life had already carved lines of sorrow across her face. Her belly carried the silent weight of a secret she could no longer hide, and every step she took was filled with questions that had no answers. Where could she go now? Who would take her in? The world had turned its back, and the whispers of judgment followed her everywhere. Her family had sent her away, her friends had disappeared, and the place she once called home no longer had space for her. Alone and frightened, she felt the future closing in like a storm she could not outrun. The forest stretched endlessly before her, dark and wild, a place where no one dared to wander at night. Yet here she was, trembling, her heart pounding, with every sound that broke through the silence. Crickets sang, owls called, and in the distance, something else moved. Something powerful, unseen but near. She paused, her breath caught in her throat, unsure if it was danger or salvation that waited ahead. Her stomach ached, not only from hunger, but from the life growing inside her, reminding her that she could not afford to stop, not now. As the moonlight broke through the trees, she saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed to carry both fire and calm, he stood as though he had been waiting. His presence filled the clearing, commanding yet steady, like the land itself bowed to his strength. He was the Alpha Apache, known in whispers and stories that traveled from village to village. Some said he was ruthless, others said he was protector of the broken and lost. She had never expected to meet him here, not when she had nothing left to give, not when she was at her weakest. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. She wanted to run, yet her feet stayed rooted to the earth. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Something in his gaze pierced through the walls of fear she had built around her heart. But was it kindness or judgment? No one could tell. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for what he would do next. He took a step closer, and the air grew heavier. His voice, deep and steady, broke the silence, though his words were not yet clear. Would he turn her away like everyone else? Would he see her only as a burden? Or was this the moment her story would change forever? She clutched her belly tighter, standing at the edge of a fate she could not escape, caught between despair and the unknown. And just as the wind shifted through the trees, he moved again, closing the distance between them. Something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would change not only her life, but his as well. The night had brought them together, but neither of them could imagine what awaited once the dawn arrived. He stopped a few paces away and set his hands where I could see them, empty, calm. The wind moved through the pines and carried the faint smoke of a camp I couldn't see. For a long beat, we only listened. A branch clicked, an owl called once, and my breath came in short, careful pulls. He didn't ask the questions everyone else had asked. He didn't demand a name or a story or proof. He only said, "You're cold." Then he shrugged off his jacket and held it out, not touching me, letting me choose. I stared at the jacket like it might bite, then took it and slipped my arms in. It smelled like cedar, sun, and the dust of a long road. The weight of it steadied me more than I wanted to admit. I hadn't meant to walk this far. In the morning, I'd told myself I would just make it to the bus stop, then to the end of the county line, then to the first stretch of trees. The road had been a ribbon of heat and glare, and the faces in the store windows had turned into mirrors I couldn't stand. Back home, the whispers had grown teeth. People said the kind of things that stick even after you leave. They said I had brought this on myself. They said my mother had failed me. They said I should be grateful for a second chance somewhere else, as if somewhere else would be kinder. My mother had stood at the sink that last night, hands in soapy water, eyes on the dark window. "I can't fight them all," she said, "but I'm not turning my back on you." Still, the house had filled with threats from people who pretended they cared about what was right. A cousin offered a ride. That felt like a trap. A neighbor talked about programs like I wasn't in the room. I packed what I could fit in a school backpack and left before dawn. Not because I didn't love her, but because the noise made it impossible to hear my own heart. He nodded toward the trees and spoke low. "There's a fire not far. Safe enough to sit a while." The word safe made something crack in my chest. I counted my steps as I followed him. 1, 2, 3, like a spell to keep me upright. He moved as if he knew every root and rock by heart, but he kept his pace small, matched to mine, never letting the distance grow. He wore a band around his wrist, woven and frayed where the knot sat, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes that come from years of sun and watching. People called him the Alpha Apache in the towns that ringed these hills, half in awe and half in warning, like he was both banner and barrier. In the stories I'd heard, he faced down men with trucks and papers who wanted to carve a new road through old ground. He dealt with deputies who liked to test their power on borderlines. He sat with elders who guarded songs and names like fire. We came to a small clearing where stones circled ash and a tarp stretched between two trees. The fire was only a memory, but he coaxed an ember awake with the patience of someone who had never rushed a flame. When the first thin lick of orange grew, he set a small tin on the coals. "Water," he said, "then we talk." I lowered to a log and pulled the jacket tight. My stomach gave a quiet twist, and I tried not to flinch. He noticed, but didn't. Pointed out. Thunder murmured far off. Or maybe it was the highway. Or maybe it was my own blood in my ears. He passed the tin when it steamed and watched the edge of the clearing, not me, giving me space to drink without feeling examined. The lie. Heat slid down and turned my shaking into a slow hum instead of a rattle. "I won't take you into the village without asking," he said after a while. "There are rules, not against you, for everyone. Keeps trust strong." His voice held no apology, only a plain statement which somehow felt kinder. "We have an outpost not far. Dry roof. First aid. We can stop there until we decide next. Steps." The way he said "we" made me look up. It was a small word, but it felt like a door opening. I nodded. "I can help carry your pack," he offered. I held it tighter and shook my head. He gave a single nod back, as if the refusal was a fact of the land, not a challenge. I hadn't told anyone the whole of how I got here because the whole of it felt like a map I didn't want to hand over. There had been a boy with a nice smile, and a car that smelled like cherry air freshener, and for a time I believed smiles could build a shelter by themselves. There had been pressure from corners I didn't expect. There had been a night after a fight at home where I'd stayed out too late and came back to a version of myself I didn't recognize. But the story people wanted wasn't about me. It was about blame. It was about pointing. It was about making an example. When the test came back, the town moved like a single mouth. The school counselor spoke in slow phrases that felt like they belonged to a brochure. A nurse in a clinic 2 towns over asked gentle questions, then warned me about people who would try to decide for me. Every path bent toward someone else's choice. Every door had a hand pushing it closed. I didn't want to be a headline or a cautionary tale. I wanted a quiet place to think, to breathe, to let this life inside me grow, without that crushing weight of ice. We started walking again, this time off the path under branches that reached low. He stepped where the ground gave and listened before each move. Once he held up a palm and I stopped. A thin line of coyote prints crossed the soft earth, and he touched one with 2 fingers like he was greeting an old neighbor. "They move around us anyway," he said. "Best to move with them." He handed me a strip of dried apple from a pouch, and I chewed slow, grateful for the simple sweet. He didn't ask my age. He didn't have to. It was written on my face and my voice and the way I reacted to the world, ready to flinch at every sudden sound. What he did ask was, "Do you have someone to call?" I thought of my mother's hands in soapy water, the way she had pressed a $20 into my palm like she was sliding me a piece of herself. I thought of the boy who had gone quiet when I needed him to speak. "No," I said, "not right now." He accepted it like some truths don't need paperwork. He told me about the land as we moved, the way you talk about relatives. He named ridges and washes and springs that hid unless you looked at them from the right angle. He spoke about the dry years when the grass cut your ankles like wire, and about a winter when snow came down so fast it erased paths and forced everyone to stay where they were and speak to the people they had been avoiding. He didn't center himself in any of it. He spoke about a circle of people who held each other up when the wind got mean. He spoke about elders who had taught him that strength could be quiet and still, not just loud and wide. He spoke about kids who ran fast and far and then came home anyway, because home is the place that still says your name without turning it into a weapon. He didn't use the word leader. He didn't need to. There was a story in his voice too, one he didn't lay out but that I felt in the pauses. The way he looked at the tree line told me he'd had to take a stand there more than once. The way he angled his body when a truck rumbled beyond the ridge told me he had learned which engines meant trouble and which meant neighbors. The way he checked the sky told me he'd been caught in storms that had nothing to do with weather. I wondered who had taught him to move like that. I wondered who had asked him to carry so much. I wondered if he ever wished he could set it down. For a second I wanted to tell him everything just to make some of what he carried feel lighter, but I held my silence. I had learned the hard way that words can be taken out of you and used to make walls. The outpost was a simple shack with a tin roof and a door that stuck. It stood on a shelf of rock above a narrow creek that sounded like coins pouring into a jar. A faded blanket hung from a nail. There was a cot, a wooden chair, and a shelf with a box of bandages and a small radio. He set his hand on the radio and drew it back. "Signals watched sometimes," he said. "We wait a little." He lit a small fire in a ring of stones outside instead, careful to keep the flame low. He boiled water again and dropped in leaves from a pouch. "Mild tea," he said. "Help settle the body. If anything feels wrong, you tell me." His tone made it easy to believe him. I wrapped my hands around the cup and let the steam rise to my face until my eyes watered in a way that had nothing to do with smoke. "People think I'm stone," he said after a while, like he was telling me a secret that wasn't heavy. "Stone doesn't listen. We try to listen." He glanced toward the creek. "We've been dealing with crews who don't listen. They cut without asking. They leave gates open. They leave fires half out. We've kept things quiet on our side, because the quiet keeps us safe. Bringing you in isn't simple, but leaving you out is not an option." He didn't say who would be angry, or what they might do. He didn't have to. I sensed the thin line he walked every day, the balance between care and risk. I wondered if I was a stone laid on his scale at the worst time. I told him about the bus driver who had looked at me and then looked away, like eye contact might force him to choose. I told him about the woman at the gas station who had slipped me a banana and a bottle of water without a word. I told him about the field I had slept in the night before, the way the ground had held me like it remembered girls who had run before and girls who had returned. I told him that I didn't know what I wanted, only what I didn't want. More hands on my life. More voices in my head, more rules that didn't fit the shape of my days. He listened the way you listen to rain, without trying to change its rhythm. "You're not a problem to solve," he said, and my throat hurt at the relief that rose and tried to turn into tears. "You are a person. We can make a plan after dawn. Until then, you rest." He gave me a blanket and took the chair by the door. He didn't sleep. I could tell by the steady way he breathed and the way his head lifted at each small sound. The forest had its own clock, and it ticked through, the hours and scents and rustles. My body eased, but my mind sketched circles. In one version of the morning, he spoke to elders who agreed to offer shelter. In another, men I did not know arrived with questions and badges, and I was pulled into a system that would decide for me. I thought about hospitals, about kindly nurses and long forms. I thought about my mother, and whether she was at the kitchen table with her phone in her hand, calling me and hanging up and calling again. I wanted to hear her voice, but I didn't want to tell her where I was, not yet. Not until I had language to make it sound less like running and more like choosing. Just before the sky began to pale, he stood and moved to the window. "Hear that?" he whispered. I held my breath. At first I heard only the creak and the small pop of coals. Then I caught it, the slow throb of engines, out of place at this hour, too many for a simple ranch run. He pinched the wick of the lantern, and all at once the room fell into the soft gray of pre-morning. He didn't panic. He tilted his head, as if counting. I felt the old fear gnaw at my stomach, a quick, sharp worry the tea could not touch. He motioned me to the corner where the shadows gathered deepest. "Quiet," he said, not a command, but a promise that he would be quiet too. The trucks did not come up our trail. They paused, then idled somewhere beyond the trees. Voices carried in the thin air, men drifting in and out of range, a laugh that didn't belong to this place, the clank of metal on metal. "Surveyors," he murmured, his mouth close to my ear, his breath warm and steady. Or people who use that word to mean something else. He looked at the radio again, and I saw the war inside him, call and risk being heard, or wait and risk being surprised. The fire outside had gone to glow, and he kicked dirt over it with the heel of his boot until even the glow disappeared. We stayed like that for long minutes that felt like a stretched wire. The engines cut. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a door opens. You don't want open. A footstep sounded on the rocks below, then another, and then a low whistle, casual, like someone out for a walk. He lifted his finger to his lips and shook his head once, a warning not to shift even a breath. My heart beat so hard I thought it would give me away. I pressed my palm over it like that might muffle the sound. He moved toward the door, silent, as fog, and eased the latch down with 2 fingers. The latch clicked, tiny and loud at the same time. Boots scuffed on the step. A shadow broke the seam of light under the door and paused there, as if tasting the air inside. The Alpha set his stance, not aggressive, not afraid, just ready. Whoever stood on the other side drew a breath like they were about to speak, and the first word formed without sound on their tongue as the dawn laid a thin silver line along the ridge. The door shivered against the touch of whoever stood outside. Their shadow lingered, unmoving, as if they were listening for breath, for the scrape of a chair, for proof of life inside. My body froze tight in the corner, every nerve tuned to that stillness. The Alpha did not flinch. His shoulders were steady, his stance wide but calm, his hand resting near the latch as though he could control the very air between us. Then, without warning, the shadow shifted and retreated. Boots scuffed on the rocks again, but the sound carried sideways this time, not forward. A laugh rose faintly, then another, and the engines coughed back to life. The trucks rumbled away, leaving behind only silence and the faint stink of exhaust. But the quiet didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like something had been marked, like someone had been close enough to sense us but had chosen not to act. Yet. The Alpha didn't relax, even as the last hum of engines faded. He turned slowly from the door and met my eyes, his expression unreadable. "That wasn't chance," he said softly. "They knew this place was here." His voice carried the weight of experience, the kind that didn't guess but knew. I wanted to ask who they were, what they wanted, but my throat was locked tight with fear. He didn't explain further, not then. Instead, he gestured toward the blanket. You rest again if you can. We'll move before the sun climbs too high. Didn't rest. I sat curled in the corner, listening to the creak, my thoughts racing. If those men came back, what would they do if they found me here? I wasn't just a runaway girl anymore. I was a runaway girl who had stumbled into the path of the Alpha Apache, and from the way his jaw stayed tight, I knew that meant more than I understood. The child inside me shifted, a soft reminder that I wasn't alone even in the silence. My hand rested there, pressing gently, wondering if this tiny life could sense the danger too. When morning finally broke, pale light spilling, across the clearing, he opened the door and let the cool air sweep in. He didn't speak of the night's encounter, not directly, but I could see it working behind his eyes. He packed quickly, tying bundles with practiced ease, moving with purpose but never panic. I gathered my few things, clumsy compared to his, sure motions, and followed him as we slipped back into the forest. The trees swallowed us, their shadows long and thick, and for a time we didn't speak. Only the sound of our steps and the call of distant birds filled the space. As we walked, the tension between us grew into something unspoken, but alive. He was protector, guide, perhaps even leader of many. But I was still an outsider, carrying a weight I had not asked for. I could feel the question burning. Would his people accept me? Or would I be just another problem left at his feet? Somewhere deep down, I knew the men in the trucks weren't the only conflict waiting for us. People had their own judgments, their own ways of deciding who belonged and who didn't. The trail curved toward a ridge, and from the top, I could see the stretch of land beyond. Smoke rose from another camp far away, thin lines against the sky. That's theirs, he said quietly. Survey crews, or men who claim to be. They cut deeper each season, pushing lines where they don't belong. His gaze hardened. And they'll keep pushing until someone stands in the way. He didn't say it directly, but I understood. He was the one who stood there, and now I was tangled in the same struggle, whether I wanted to be or not. By midday, we reached a wider path, one clearly used but not by outsiders. Tracks of hooves and boots crossed it, layered in patterns. He paused, crouched low, and touched the earth, reading it like a page. Scouts, he murmured. Our people. They'll know we passed through. There was comfort in that, yet a fresh wave of worry. Too, if they found me with him, would they see a frightened girl in need of help, or an intruder bringing trouble to their doorstep? When we stopped by a stream to drink, I finally asked the question that had been clawing at me since the night before. Why help me? My voice was small, almost swallowed by the rush of water. He didn't answer right away. He sat on a rock, eyes on the horizon, as if weighing which truth I could carry. Because you were left with nothing, he said at last. And no one survives long out here with nothing, not you, not the child. The words caught me off guard, the way he said child instead of mistake or burden. It stirred something fragile inside me, a thread of hope tangled with fear. But even as he spoke, I could sense there was more. His help wasn't just about me, it was about principle, about the way he had drawn lines against the world and refused to let them be crossed. Maybe he saw me as another line, another test of what he stood for. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something personal he wasn't saying, something in his past that echoed with my present. As the sun sank lower, painting the trees in amber light, we neared another outpost, this one larger. Smoke rose from a chimney, and faint voices drifted from the cabins tucked among the pines. I felt my chest tighten. Soon I would no longer be just a secret carried through the forest by one man. I would be seen, judged, measured. The thought terrified me more than the strangers in the trucks. I slowed my steps, but he noticed. "They'll ask questions," he admitted. "But I'll answer them first. You won't stand alone." His tone was steady, yet I caught the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The voices grew clearer, and with them the sound of hammers, of work being done, of life continuing no matter what storms lingered outside. It should have been comforting, but for me it was another threshold. Each step closer felt like a step into unknown fire. Would they welcome me or turn me away as others had? Would they see me as part of his fight or as the weakness that might break his strength? I thought of my mother then, the way she had looked out the window with eyes full of both fear and love. I wondered if she would believe me safe here, or if she would beg me to return. I wondered if she was searching for me even now, her hands still raw from scrubbing dishes while she prayed for my name to appear on her phone. My heart twisted at the thought, but I kept walking, because turning back was no longer an option. And yet, even as we approached the cabins, even as the voices grew close enough to catch words, I couldn't shake the image of those trucks in the night, men with maps and claims and laughter that didn't belong in the forest. I knew they would return, stronger, louder, unwilling to let go of what they thought they owned. And when they did, I would be caught in the storm. The Alpha's fight was becoming my fight, whether I was ready or not. When a figure finally stepped from the shadows of the nearest cabin and spotted us, their voice rang out sharp with recognition. "You're back. But who is that with you?" The question sliced through the air, and all at once every eye turned toward me. My breath caught. The Alpha's silence was long, deliberate, his face unreadable. I knew whatever he said next would set the path of everything to come. And for one trembling moment, I wondered if even he had the strength to carry what my presence would bring. Every face that turned toward me in that camp carried something different: curiosity, suspicion, caution, even open concern. My throat tightened as I pulled the Alpha's jacket closer around me, though the morning air was already warm. It was as if every whisper I had heard back in town had followed me here, only now it came in the form of narrowed eyes and folded arms. The first figure, tall and sharp-eyed, stepped closer. "We don't bring strangers here without reason," he said. His voice wasn't cruel, but it cut clean. He looked me over, not unkind, but with the weight of someone measuring risk. The Alpha didn't flinch. She was alone in the forest, 14, carrying a child. "Would you have left her?" The words silenced the gathering. No one spoke for a long moment, the weight of my truth settling in like smoke. Then the questions began. Where was I from? Why was I here? Did anyone follow me? Each one felt like an arrow, and I answered as best I could, short and careful. My story was fragile, and I feared that if I told it too plainly, it would break. I saw a few soften, their eyes dipping toward my stomach, while others hardened, sensing only burden. And all the while, the Alpha stood beside me, his presence a shield that kept the questions from burning me alive. But beneath the voices, beneath the tension of whether I would be allowed to stay, another sound grew louder in my memory, the rumble of engines from the night before. Those men had not gone far. They had left because it suited them, not because they were finished. And deep down, I knew they would return, and when they did, they would not come quietly. By the fire that evening, I caught fragments of hushed conversations. Some worried that my presence had already drawn unwanted attention. Others argued that turning me away would be no different from the cruelty I had already endured. "If we send her out, those men will find her," one voice said. "And if they find her near us, they'll use it against us," another countered. The Alpha listened but didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his silence more powerful than words. That night, as I lay awake on a cot in a small cabin, I heard the Alpha's footsteps outside, steady and watchful. He didn't sleep, not while I was under his protection. I wondered if this was how he lived always, one ear tuned to the forest, one hand ready to act. He carried himself like someone who had already given up pieces of himself for others, and I feared being the next piece he would lose. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of waiting and watching. The people in the camp worked around me, fetching water, repairing fences, carrying wood. Some offered me food without words. Others avoided me altogether. I helped where I could, though my body tired quickly, and more than once I caught someone, glancing at my belly with a mix of pity and unease. I felt like a question no one wanted to answer. Then, one afternoon, the forest broke open with sound. Engines again, closer, louder, bolder. Shouts echoed through the trees, followed by the metallic clang of tools and the unmistakable bite of saws cutting where they didn't belong. The Alpha's face darkened as he listened. He spoke to the others in low tones, and I heard only fragments. Too soon, not ready. They pushed deeper. The camp shifted into motion. Scouts slipped into the woods, silent and swift. Others gathered tools that weren't weapons but could be. I stayed near the cabin, my heart racing, fear thick in my throat. I wanted to ask what would happen if the men came here, if they saw me, but the words stuck. I already knew the answer. My presence would be one more reason for conflict. That evening, the scouts returned with news. The men had set up a new post not far from the ridge. Trucks loaded with supplies, men with clipboards and maps, and guards who carried more than survey gear. They're not just marking land, one scout said grimly. They're preparing to claim it. The Alpha's jaw tightened. Then it begins sooner than we thought. His words carried the weight of something long expected, but dreaded all the same. Every eye turned to him, waiting for direction. And in that moment I understood fully why they called him the Alpha Apache. He wasn't just a man. He was the anchor. They leaned on when storms threatened to tear everything apart. But storms don't wait for permission. That night, as the camp settled into uneasy silence, lights flared on the ridge. Floodlights, cutting through the trees, sweeping the dark, like giant hands searching for prey. The hum of engines didn't fade. It grew, surrounding us, pressing closer. I stood in the doorway of the cabin, my hand on my stomach, watching the glow creep nearer. Fear twisted sharp inside me, not only for myself, but for the people who had taken me in, despite their doubts. The Alpha stepped up beside me, his shadow stretching long in the firelight. His eyes were fixed on the ridge, hard and unyielding. They're testing us, he said, his voice low but certain. And they won't stop. He looked down at me then, just for a breath, and in his gaze I saw something I couldn't name, something between warning and promise. Whatever comes, you stay close. The floodlights swept again, brighter, blinding for a heartbeat, and then voices rang out across the valley. Commands, laughter, challenges. It was no longer the quiet threat of night. It was open, deliberate, impossible to ignore. The camp stirred awake, people rushing to their places, some grabbing tools, others gathering children into arms. The air thickened with fear and defiance, a mix that sparked like fire in dry grass. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, my heart pounding against my ribs. This was it. The moment everything bent toward the unknown. The men from the ridge were no longer shadows in the night. They were here, at our doorstep, and the line between safety and danger was about to shatter. And as the Alpha moved forward, shoulders squared, eyes blazing in the glare of the lights, I knew we had reached the day. Edge of something irreversible. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It had arrived. The lights on the ridge cut across the valley like blades, daring anyone below to rise against them. For a long moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The Alpha stood in front of the campfire, his silhouette framed by flame and shadow and all eyes were fixed on him. He did not shout or rush forward. Instead, he raised one hand, calm and steady, and the crowd behind him grew quiet. Even the children hushed, sensing that this moment mattered. From the ridge, voices carried, again louder this time, filled with arrogance. They claimed land that wasn't theirs. They laughed about fences and lines, as if the trees and rivers could be divided by ink on a map. Then came the challenge, demanding the Alpha to show himself, demanding that he surrender the ground beneath our feet. For a heartbeat, I thought he might walk straight into their light, offering himself up in defiance. But he didn't. He stood tall and called back, his voice deep and clear. This land is not for sale. It is not for taking. You know it, and so do we. His words echoed off the hills, firm as stone. The men on the ridge jeered. A few fired shots into the air, the sound cracking like thunder. I felt my knees weaken, fear crawling up my spine. But the Alpha didn't flinch. He motioned to his people, and they moved into formation. Not with guns, but with torches, drums, and banners painted with symbols older than any claim on a deed. One by one, flames lit across the clearing until the darkness glowed with a circle of fire. Then the drumming began, deep and steady, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. I had never heard anything so powerful. It wasn't a call to violence. It was a call to presence, to belonging. Every beat said, "We are here." Every flame said, "We will not be erased." The men on the ridge fell quiet, their laughter fading into uncertain murmurs. The Alpha stepped forward. Then, raising his voice so it carried across the valley, he spoke of ancestors who had walked these lands before, of rivers that had given life, of trees that had stood watch through generations. He spoke not only for himself, but for everyone who had suffered under the weight of being dismissed, forgotten, pushed aside. His words weren't loud with anger, but heavy with truth, the kind of truth that even armed men couldn't silence. For a long while there was no response. Then slowly, the lights on the ridge began to dim, one by one. Engines growled, tires bit into dirt, and the trucks began to retreat, not in defeat exactly, but in hesitation, unsettled by a strength they hadn't expected. The forest darkened, again, and only the glow of the torches remained. Relief washed through the camp, but it wasn't celebration. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes after standing too close to the edge. That night, no one slept easily. But I sat near the fire, watching its embers burn down, and felt something shift inside me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like a mistake hiding in the shadows. I had witnessed what it meant to stand, even when the odds pressed hard. And though I had done nothing but watch, I knew I was part of it now. In the days that followed, the camp became busier. Scouts tracked the movement of the trucks, messengers carried word to nearby villages, and plans were made for what would happen if the men returned in greater force. Through it, all the Alpha moved like a pillar, always present, always steady, listening as much as he spoke. And though he carried the weight of leadership, I noticed the way he made space for others, how he asked the elders before making choices, how he trusted the young to take their own roles. He was a leader, yes, but never alone. For me, life took on a new rhythm. I helped where I could, fetching water, preparing food, tending to the fire when my body allowed. Slowly, people began to see me not just as an outsider, but as someone willing to contribute. One woman, older with kind eyes, placed a hand on my belly one morning and whispered a blessing in her own language. Tears filled my eyes at the tenderness of it, so different from the harsh words I had left behind. For the first time, I felt that this child might be welcomed into the world without shame. The Alpha never asked me for my full story. He never pressed for details of the boy I had left behind, or the town that had cast me out. Instead, he gave me space to shape my own path, reminding me only that I was not alone anymore. "This is not an end for you," he told me one evening, as we watched the sun bleed into the horizon. "It is a beginning. You decide what kind." His words planted something in me, a quiet strength I hadn't known I could carry. Weeks passed, and though the men from the ridge didn't return immediately, the tension never fully left. Everyone knew they would try again, because that's what the world often does. It tries to take what it does not understand. But the camp was ready now, bound closer than before, more determined to protect not just the land, but the people who needed it. And somehow, I became part of that determination. 1. Morning, I wrote a letter to my mother. I didn't know if it would reach her, but I needed her to know I was safe, that I had found a place where my voice wasn't silenced. I told her about the Alpha, about the night the ridge lit up with fire, about the people who had begun to treat me as one of their own. I told her that I missed her, that I carried her strength in me, and that someday, when the time was right, I would return. The child inside me grew stronger each day, reminding me with every movement that life continues even when the world feels impossible. And though fear still lived in me, it was no longer the only thing I carried. Now I carried hope too. When I looked back at the Alpha, at the way he stood with his people unshaken by threats, I understood why fate had led me to him. I had met him at my lowest, when I was lost and broken, and he had shown me that even in the darkest forest, there is light if you dare to follow it. He had not saved me like a hero from a story. He had given me the chance to save myself by reminding me that I mattered. In the end, the conflict with the outsiders would not vanish overnight. There would always be lines to defend, always voices trying to drown out the truth. But I had learned something vital. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it is a steady hand offering a jacket to a girl in the cold. Sometimes it is a community, refusing to let its roots be torn out. Sometimes it is a quiet promise spoken by firelight that tomorrow can be different. And as the fire burned low one final night, I felt peace settle into me. The Alpha had returned to his watch. The people moved around me like family, and I rested my hands on the life within me, ready for whatever came next. My story had not ended in loneliness on a dirt path. It had turned into something unexpected, something fierce and alive. At 14, pregnant and alone, I had thought my life was over. But meeting the Alpha Apache had shown me it was only just beginning. And in that beginning, I found not just survival, but belonging. Not just fear, but courage. Not just despair, but hope that no matter what storms rose again, I would never face them the same way I had before. That was the gift the Alpha gave me, and it was more powerful than any enemy, more lasting than any fear. It was the gift of knowing I was not alone anymore, and never would be again.